Okay, so we are now in module 16. So this is entitled Internal Control in a CIS Environment. For the overview of this module, so we will be discussing about the CIS environment and the appropriate internal controls to be applied to prevent, detect, and correct the misstatements, and also to prevent fraud and errors. So at the end of this module, you will be able to understand the CIS environment and its appropriate internal controls. For the contents, so we will be discussing about Computer Information System or CIS environment, its internal controls, and the Database Management System or DBMS. Okay, so to start with, let us discuss about the Computer Information System environment. So when we say CIS environment, this normally exists when a computer or any type or size is involved or used in processing the financial information of the entity. Okay, and of course, this is significant when in terms of auditing. Okay, because in this case, the auditor will plan and perform the appropriate audit procedures for such CIS environment. So whether that computer is operated by the entity or by the third party, the point here is that a computer system is being used, okay, to process the financial information of the entity. So the auditor in this case should understand the CIS organizational structure, its characteristics, okay, that is especially related to the nature of processing the information, and as well as the design and the procedures involved in the system. So of course, this is very important for the auditor to know what are the appropriate audit procedures, okay, to be performed in gathering sufficient appropriate audit evidences. So we have here the characteristics of a CIS environment. Okay, so first, there is concentration of functions and knowledge. Okay, because in this case, in a CIS environment, the number of persons in processing, okay, of the financial information is reduced. Okay, because there are certain functions and tasks which are being eliminated, and the person involved here will only be operating, okay, the computer system. So that's why in this kind of environment, there is a lesser need for human resource. Okay. Another characteristic is concentration of functions. Okay, still in concentration of functions and knowledge. So in relation to this also, many control procedures that would ordinarily be performed by the separate individuals in the case of a manual system. So in this in the CIS environment, it can be concentrated, or functions may be performed by a small group of person or employees, okay, as mentioned as well. So thus, an individual who has access to the computer programs, processing, or data may also be in the position to perform incompatible functions. So this will be now the problem, because segregation of duties is somewhat taken for granted because of the concentration of functions and knowledge in the CIS environment. So this is very important for the auditor, so that he will be able to know if possible fraud or error or leading to misstatement may exist. Okay, so another characteristic of a CIS environment is the concentration of programs and data. So the transaction and master file are often concentrated or centralized. So usually in a machine-readable form, either in one computer or in a number of different computers distributed throughout the entity. Okay, but the point here is that normally, because of these computer systems, So the entity may use the database where all the information and data are contained. Okay, so that's how it is in the CIS environment. Okay, another characteristic is uniform processing of transactions. So computer processing, normally this is uniformly processes the like or similar transactions with the same processing instructions. So here, this is when the CIS or the computer system becomes efficient, okay, and fast, because it may process the same or similar transactions in a smaller amount of time and with a limited per human interaction. Okay. Thus, the clerical errors associated with manual processing are normally or virtually eliminated because there is a standardized process already. And when there is an input, for example, or a process that is not recognized by the program, then it will not be processed. Okay, so that's how CIS environment is operating. So this will help in eliminating the errors. Okay. So, however, programming errors or other systematic errors in the hardware or in the software will ordinarily result in all transactions being processed incorrectly. So, again, depending on the status of the software as well as the hardware. So, this is where the problem will arise. Okay, but when it comes to processing, if that is in place, so there would be no problem and lesser errors. Okay. Another characteristic of CIS environment is the absence of input documents or source documents. So data may be entered directly into the computer system without the supporting documents, or the transactions may be online. So meaning it will go through the computer to be processed and input as well, where coming from the computer or from the internet, okay, and even without the supporting documents. So that's why, because of this absence of input of documents, it will result into lack of visible transaction trail and audit trail on the part of the auditor. So certain data may be maintained on the computer files only. Okay, and it will be sometimes hard for the auditor to determine if the transaction was authorized, okay, or was conducted properly. Okay, so that will be the problem later on. So because of the lack of a visible transaction trail, so this may be partly in machine readable form and it may exist only for a limited period of time. So that is the limitation as well of CIS environment. Okay, so in contrast, when a manual system is used, so normally it is possible to follow a trail, okay, to the system because there is source documents, books of accounts, records, files, and tangible reports where the auditor can trace or vouch a particular transaction or account balance. Okay, so the processing results may not be printed, or only a summary of data may be provided. So that's how it is under the CIS environment, because lesser paper and processing in a lesser period of time. Okay, so in contrast, in the case of the manual system, it is normally possible to examine visually the reports. Okay, so another characteristic of the CIS environment is there is an ease of access to data and computer program. So here, it may be accessed. So aside from that, it may be altered as well, okay, through the use of the computer equipment at the remote locations. Okay, meaning it can be manipulated or hacked. So that's one of the disadvantage of CIS environment or using the computer as well. Okay, another characteristic is consistency of performance. So as mentioned earlier, because there is a standardized processing, okay, so therefore it will result into a consistent performance. So CIS perform functions exactly as programmed. So again, as mentioned, if there is an input or process that is not recognized by the program, then it will not be processed thoroughly or through. Okay, so they are also potentially more reliable than in the manual systems because also errors will be eliminated or minimized. Okay, and next, another characteristic is programs or of the CIS environment is that program control or there is program control procedures. So the nature of computer processing will allow the design of the internal control procedures in the computer program. So it can be installed along with the programs, the internal controls, okay, or the procedures. So another is a single transaction update of multiple computer files or database. So meaning a single input of the to the application system may automatically update all the records. So that's how efficient computer is, okay, in processing the financial data. So there you can even with just a single edit, okay, in one location or file, it will automatically recompute or uh, update, okay, the other records associated with it. Okay. Next characteristic is system generated transactions. So certain transactions may be initiated by the CIS itself without the need for an input document. Okay, so again, this is, for example, in the case of an online transaction. Okay, that's why, again, audit trail is eliminated because there is no input document that was used. Okay, another characteristic is vulnerability of data and program storage media. So in this case, large volume of data and the computer programs that is used to process may be stored on a storage media that are vulnerable to theft, loss, natural deterioration, or destruction. So that's one of the problems also and limitations, okay, in a CIS environment. Okay, especially that in this case, the files can be hacked, it can be stolen or saved, okay, in a storage media, or um, the the virus, okay, or other threats in the internet, okay, may affect such. Okay. Another characteristic is for the storage control, because of vulnerability of data and storage media controls such as dual write routines, validity checks, and physical controls should be undertaken. So this is an internal control that the entity should maintain, okay, to avoid data loss or theft. As regards to the dual write routines, so there is technology that is being used, okay, so RAID that may be employed. Okay, so RAID is it stands for redundant array of inexpensive disks. So this is grouping of multiple hard drives with special software that will allow, okay, for data delivery along multiple paths. Okay, so this is normally what is being used, okay, if the entity is able to afford it, okay, so they can use it to protect their data. So if one fails, the other disk can compensate for the loss. So that's how it can be of help, okay, to the entity. Another is potential for errors and irregularities. So this is in relation with the human error, okay, in the development, maintenance, and execution in the CIS. So this may be greater than manual system, partly because the level of detail inherent, okay, in these activities, especially if there is some loophole or other important matter that were not considered in the design of the program. okay, or even in the use, okay, of the CIS itself by the employee, okay, of an entity. So it may result into error that will lead to misstatement, okay, or even irregularities. So also the potential for individuals to gain unauthorized access. So this is fraud, okay, of the data, or to alter the data without visible evidence. Okay, so this is greater in CIS than the manual system. Okay, because in the manual system there are audit trail that needs to be or documents that needs to be included first before it can be altered. Okay, unlike in the CIS, even if there is no input document, okay, they can easily alter or change the data. So another characteristic is initiation or execution of transactions. So CIS may have the capability to initiate, as mentioned earlier, or execute certain types of transactions automatically. So if that is made online real time, okay. So the authorization of these transactions or procedures may not be documented in the same manner as those in the manual system. So this is where audit trail is lacking, okay, or no audit trail exists, okay, because of such initiation and execution. Another characteristic is dependence of other controls over the computer processing. So in computer processing, they may produce reports and other output that are used in performing manual control procedures. Okay, so here this computer processing is incorporated in the manual control procedures as their internal control. Okay, so meaning there might be some authentication needed before an access to the data, or validation, okay, before transaction may be processed. Okay, so the effectiveness of these manual control procedures can be dependent on the effectiveness also of the controls over the completeness and accuracy of the computer processing. So again, it will depend on the effectiveness of such internal control. Okay. Another characteristic is the potential for increased management supervision. So CIS can offer management a variety of analytical tools that they can use to review and supervise the operations of the entity. So this is also in the form of a software or program, okay, that can be installed. The availability of these controls may enhance the entire internal control structure. Okay, so this will easily help the management in supervising if indeed CIS is being used properly, okay, in accordance to its purpose to the entity. And lastly is potential for the use of CAATs, or computer-assisted audit techniques. So since in this case the entity is using computer system, so the audit procedures to be applied also by the auditor should be computer based as well. So they use this technology or technique. So processing large quantities of data using computers may provide the auditor with opportunities to apply CAATs in the performance of the audit test. Okay, so those are the different characteristics of a CIS environment.